Mediterranean food is admittedly what I would usually reach for last when it comes to food, but I am working on that. When I traveled to Egypt earlier this year, I had some really good food that I enjoyed. The best of which was the falafel that they gave me. I'm still raving about it. It was amazing. So I'm going to share my recipe for Egyptian style falafel. What sets this apart from other types of falafel is that it starts with fava beans instead of chickpeas. Most other places exclusively use chickpeas to make theirs, and I think it's superior to have fava beans. Sometimes you'll see a blend of both in Egypt, but I'm going to exclusively use the fava beans because that's what I have. The first thing I'll do is take 2 cups or 360 grams of dry fava beans and add water to cover them, and make sure to leave enough room for them to expand overnight. You can't use canned or cooked chickpeas or fava beans. They have to be dry and raw for this to work. After at least 8 hours, they should have absorbed enough water to move on to the next step. I realistically think the only way to do this is with a good food processor. It's definitely almost impossible by hand, and I wouldn't use a blender because it's not going to get the right texture. I'm going to add the beans into the processor, which I'm doing this in 2 batches because I have a lot. You can half this recipe and it's more reasonable for a meal or a family appetizer, but I'm making a lot to freeze later. I'm also adding a large yellow onion that I've chopped roughly so it fits better, 4 to 5 cloves of garlic with the butts chopped off, and then a few herbs. I have a bunch of Italian parsley, just the leaves because the stems are bitter. Then another bunch of cilantro or coriander, and you can use the stems here because these aren't as bitter. And then lastly, a handful of fresh dill, which brings a signature flavor. Then you don't need to season it with much. Simple is better here, so I'm going to use 1 teaspoon of ground coriander and 1 teaspoon of ground cumin. Then about a half teaspoon of baking soda, which is going to help these when they fry. Then a large pinch or about a teaspoon of salt, and then a bunch of freshly ground black pepper. Then this gets pulsed and processed until it's a really fine paste. You're going to have to stop and scrape down the sides a few times to make sure everything is cohesive. But when you're done, you're looking for this really beautiful green paste. I'm repeating with the other half of my ingredients. The totals are listed below, and then I'm combining that into a bowl. I try to let that sit and rest for about 20 minutes to make sure everything is evenly hydrated, which is going to help us roll it into a ball easier. And I've seen people air fry these, but I think the only way to make this is to deep fry it. So if you're going to go through the trouble of making this, I would recommend deep frying it. I'm filling a wok or large pan with a good bit of neutral oil and then heating that to about 350 to 375 Fahrenheit. And you could pre-roll the balls, but I think it's really easy to do with one of these press release scoops. This is like a 1.5 tablespoon ice cream scoop, which worked perfectly for the portion size I wanted. All I do is scoop a good bit out of the bowl, just a little bit bigger than the scoop itself. And then carefully but confidently dump that into the hot oil. Just try to keep it together. And you can fit like 4 to 5 balls in there, but it is going to drop the temperature of your oil, so be aware of that. After they have a second in the oil to gather themselves, I kind of bump them around with my spider to make sure they're not sticking to anything. Just keep them moving, and then they're really done after like 90 seconds to 2 minutes. If your temperature is right, then they'll be perfectly done on the inside when the outside is nicely browned like this. You're just looking for it to be a nice and tender green on the inside. But if your temperature is too hot, they'll brown too fast and the inside will be kind of raw when you're done, so just be aware of that. As they're finishing, I'm sticking them on a wire rack and leaving that in the oven at its lowest temperature to keep them warm and crispy. And at that point you're done and you can eat these, but I think they're best served with a sauce. Traditionally, a tahini sauce is served with this, but I'm just making some kind of generic white sauce for this.
Generic white sauce? Was that your nickname in high school? No. It was actually Matt Swagger. People probably called you that ironically, just to, not be on bad terms with you. I have a problem with the way you talk to me. You have a lot of problems. All this energy, all this stuff you throw at me. Imagine how much good you could do if you spread positivity instead. You could make so many people's lives better. Yeah, your classmates 100% called you that out of pity. All right.
Into a bowl, I'm combining a half cup each of sour cream and mayo, then about a tablespoon or a half lemon's worth of juice, 1 tablespoon of olive oil for richness, and a clove of grated garlic. And since I bought all those herbs for the falafel, I might as well use them in the sauce, so I have some parsley, cilantro, and dill that I'm chopping up. Then a hefty pinch of salt and pepper, and you can mix this and season to taste. I thought just to pay homage to the Middle East, I'm going to add a little splash of tahini, but that's optional. It really does help the flavor though. But this is again, generic white sauce that goes good on pretty much anything. It's similar to ranch or tzatziki, and those things just fit well with so many foods. Definitely good for a deep fried ball of goodness like this falafel. And you could just dip these straight into the sauce and eat them that way, but I want to enjoy this the same way I did the first time I had it in Egypt, and that would be in a sandwich form. What I had in Egypt was some form of a pita bread, and the falafel filling was stuffed inside, and it was perfect. I don't feel like making any pita or any bread, to be honest, so I'm just gonna buy some frozen bread that I had at my Indian market. They did not have any pita, so I just went for this whole wheat roti. All you really have to do for these is just heat them up in a pan, and they're good to go like they're fresh. The problem is, after I heated this up, it kind of turned out to not be what I wanted. It didn't really have an opening where I could stuff things inside. The bottom just kind of broke apart, and it was not going to work unless I made some kind of a taco shape. So I went into my freezer, and I have a few of these paratha left that I've used in other videos. They're a little more flaky, so I have higher hopes that they're going to fit our needs here. So I quickly cook that on both sides until it's nice and brown, and then I'll tear a slit off the outside and then try to open the inside to make it hollow so we can stuff it. This is not perfect, but it's gonna work. To construct my sandwich, I'm gonna start with a couple of balls of fresh falafel, heaping scoops of that beautiful white sauce, and then I have some fresh cherry or grape tomatoes that I'm slicing in half and adding as well. A little fresh veggie crunch is always welcome. And just for further garnish, or really for the thumbnail, just a couple of stems of that parsley to pop. Then I'll finish with a little bit more sauce, and that's it. This is so appetizing looking, and I'm really kind of upset at myself for not enjoying Mediterranean food most of my life. But let's go on and get to the taste test.
If you know me, you know I live for nostalgia, and this is nostalgic for me. I'd say this is the food that broke me into enjoying Mediterranean food. And obviously everything in this is not traditional, the sauce, the paratha bread, but this is gonna be good anyway. Let's try to bite into this thing. Cheers. Yeah, this is pretty much the flavor that I remember from Egypt. Absolutely breathtaking. It's just the tenderness of everything after being deep fried. There's nothing like this. And there's just something about the fava beans that makes this much more addicting to me than the chickpea version. It feels pretty healthy, but this doesn't taste like it's a diet food. Let's bring in this sauce and just straight up dip the falafel into it. I'm just so glad that there's diversity of food in the world because I'll never run out of stuff to try. Just the stuff that people have come up with over the generations based on whatever's around them. I never want to stop learning through food. Definitely give this a shot if you've only ever tried the regular falafel. This is better in my opinion. But I hope you learned something new. I hope you learned about another culture like I did in this video. Thank you all for watching. Be blessed, and I'll see you next time. I could mow through like 14 of those, no problem.